Rock Chat with Trace.
Welcome to Rock Chat with Trace, and this week's guest is Andy Reynolds, a live sound engineer, concert tour manager, lecturer and author. Hello Andy, and welcome to Rock Chat with Trace. Can you tell me a little about yourself?
Well, until recently I was a tour manager and live sound engineer, so I've been touring for 25 years around the world with acts.
How did you get into the music industry?
I got into the music industry because I was in bands at school and then college. I was persuaded to go to art college to pursue my musical career, much to the chagrin of my mum and dad. And then while I was at school, I learned a bit about the engineering side of it. When I was at college. And then I got a job in a local recording studio. This was in Nottingham. And all the local bands would come in there to record demos. Remember demos? And then they would play gigs. And unfortunately, the sound engineer in Nottingham, who was great, who did all the local bands, but everyone thought he was deaf. And there is some evidence that he was actually clinically deaf, poor bloke. Anyway, so I would engineer their demos, and then they would say, do you want to come and do the live sound as well? And it was just in pubs, 5 channels or whatever on the board. But I loved it. I loved the immediacy of it and the whole, the whole playing live. So I just kind of didn't devote my time, but I learned more about live engineering, just the experience, just doing loads of local bands. Eventually ended up working for a local PA company and then moved to Sheffield and got more work and then met a real live tour manager and he took me off on a tour and that was that.
So what does a tour manager do?
Tour manager is like the interface between touring band and the outside world. So I'm hired on after all the shows have been booked and all the deals have been done. I would be hired on to then hire transport, any other crew, book hotels, and to liaise with the promoters before the tour takes place, just to make sure they've got all our contracts and our riders and there's no problems. And more importantly, to ask them how the show is selling. We want everyone to sell out and have a good show. So it's just touching base. And then I travel with the band on tour and take care of the day-to-day logistics and collecting the money.
Can you describe an average day as a tour manager?
It depends on the level of touring. You've got touring where we're playing what's called non-production venues where, for instance, I'm trying to think of something like in London, there's a venue called the Lexington, or if you think about the Underworld, where you don't have to take in any PA and lights. So at that level of touring, you'd probably be in a splitter van, so you'd leave town, the previous town, in the morning, and you'd travel in the day, and then you'd arrive perhaps 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and you'd load in, set up. But when we move into big theatres and arenas, then we tend to travel overnight on sleeper buses, and this changes the whole dynamic of how the day works. So if I go back to the playing at the Underworld, perhaps, so touring, doing small venues such as the Underworld in splitter van, leave town in the morning, travel in the day. When we get there, my job would then be just to make sure everything is as we want it to be set out in our rider. Again, talking to the promoter, seeing how many tickets are sold, and then just overseeing the day as it goes on. Usually, when you're touring, it gets into a routine, but then every day you'd have other acts, opening acts, support acts. So it's saying hello to them, telling them they've got no space on stage and they've got no time for sound check, and just keeping an eye on the day. At some point, if we're in hotels, we'd leave the venue, go check into the hotel, and then spend a little bit of time there. Perhaps there's also what's called promo, interviews on the road, so people will be turning up from local radio stations or TV or whatever to interview the band, and that has to be sorted out. So it's keeping an eye on the clock, making sure you've got time to do the sound check, time for dinner, time for any promo, and all that good stuff. Getting band on stage on time, and then after the show, just making sure that we've loaded out, we've not left anything, and while the band is on stage, I would go to the promoter to do what's called the settlement, which is basically looking at how many tickets are sold, how much money we've made, if there's any percentage extra due, and just making sure that everybody's happy. But also merchandise, huge part of any band's income, so I'll be overseeing the merch seller, making sure that they've got everything they need, make sure, if there's a massive queue at the end of the night, I might leap in and help out with merchandise, and then get everybody in the van and back to the hotel for a good night's sleep.
What bands have you worked with?
Oh, loads of bands. Lots of stuff, just from everything from hip hop to rock. Definitely with rock, I haven't tour managed any rock stuff. I've done a lot of sound for Machine Head, and I've been on tour with some big metal packages. But it's, being a road crew, you work for, it's like being a plumber, you just get the job and you just go along and do it to the best of your ability.
Can you explain the current state of the live music industry?
The current state is that in the UK, venues, are they allowed to open? But there's obviously with social distancing in place. What it means is promoters put shows on, and their margins are wafer thin at the best of time. The way the industry was going, that booking agents were expecting more and more money for performances, and you either up the ticket price or you take a bath if you're a promoter. And lots of promoters were taking a bath, and it's a foolhardy profession. So but they're operating at the fact that they have to sell a lot of tickets. Now, if you introduce social distancing and you're looking safely at 30% of your capacity, then there's just no point. So in terms of what we know of gigs as they've stopped, even though I think you are allowed to put on a gig, you are allowed to put people in a venue, but there's just no point because it's not a hobby, it's supposed to be a business. And even the big boys, Live Nation, are suffering. So then there's been a move online with live streaming, which was always there. And it's good that we as consumers are now being educated to live streaming. It's just that, again, the money's not there. There seems to be a benchmark of what you can charge. It seems to be about £5, $7. And you can't make any money. By the time you hire the hall, put the infrastructure in, put the video in, put the camera crew in, plus paying the band whatever you can afford to pay them. And certain genres, just don't work as well in the live streaming environment. Was it supposed to be Knotfest this couple of weeks? Not to speak to me, is that going to work online? I watched them at Maida Vale, and so certain genres have suffered. All we can do is wait for a vaccine.
When do you think that the music industry will get back to normality, and will there be any changes?
If you're talking about the live music business, yeah, it'll only be when the governments feel safe that they can allow people to interact in that way. Obviously, people want to interact. We've seen, lots of illegal raves in the dance space. People are busting their gut to get out there. But the live music business, especially in this country, massive innovative industry, and they've proposed all sorts of guidance with medical assistance to go to the government and say, look, we could do this, but the big problem is just the capacity. Until we have a vaccine, until we have a robust track and trace, or until we can just placate people and say, you are safe when you come here, then governments aren't going to open doors. And there's a forum just taking place, and Mark Geiger, who used to be head of music at William Morris, his big booking agent, he's predicting it will be like the Roaring Twenties a century ago. After the Spanish flu, there was a massive, celebration of life, and so he's saying 2022. Because
of COVID, should the music industry be overhauled, do away with freelancers, and make all crew employees?
Controversial. I don't think it would work just because the economics. I mean, even though, some of the big rental companies, for instance, there's a big PA rental company called Britannia Row in London. They do everybody, so their job is just to supply audio equipment when bands go on tour. Even though they're big and successful, again, their margins are thin. They're into technology to satisfy the demands of acts hiring their PA. And they have full-time staff, that's usually warehouse. But then it's like feast or famine. During festival season, there is there's too much work, and there is always a labour shortage during festival season worldwide. And then, come winter, when it's pantos, it would be very difficult for freelancers or that kind of technical staff to be made full time, I think.
Can you tell me about working as a live sound engineer?
Yeah, the reason I got into it because it was different from how I was working in studios, and even now I think it's more prevalent, that everybody can buy a copy of Pro Tools or Ableton or Logic, and you can learn how to create and mix music. And then doing that live is completely different. The fundamentals of audio still apply. You've got to have good signal chain and all that good stuff. But the problems when you amplify sound, not problems, the issues that you will encounter when you amplify sound, and coupling and feedback and all that stuff, it turns into a different beast, and you have to then adapt to that. And also there's a time element with live sound engineering. Doors have to open at 7 o'clock. You know, you can't be arsing around going, I'm just going to put a bit more on this kick drum, because no, mate, you're not. We've got to open the doors, sound check, it's done. So it also, live sound engineers have a way of working that most recording engineers would just be horrified by. It's necessitated by the time constraints of what you've got.
What's it like mixing at festivals compared to indoor venues?
On a nice, clear, sunny day with no wind, mixing at festivals is a dream. In this country and a lot of European countries, there are sound limits that are part of the festival's license. And I do agree with them to a certain extent. They can be a bit draconian. So you're always thinking about how can I make the most impact, you know, and it sounds so quiet compared with mixing indoors. But you have to remember that the audience has been listening to the same volume all day. And just because you think it's quiet, they probably think that sounds reasonable. Indoors, the issues are acoustics, bright spaces. The venue will sound totally different in the afternoon than it will in the evening. They're both pleasurable depending on the venue, depending on the staff, depending on the band, depending on the hangover. They're both the same, really.
What's the most enjoyable part of your job?
It's being part of that creativity. It's being part of, knowing when the act is on stage, and you, especially if you're mixing sound as well, you're in the crowd enjoying it with them, thinking, I helped make this happen, and it's a really rewarding experience.
You're just rewriting the tour book, How to Get Your Music on the Road. Can you explain what the book's about?
It really is like it says. It's looking at explaining to artists, young artists, how the live music business works, both the production side of it and the management side of it, booking agents and promoters, and how best to approach going forward. Be mindful of the various conventions and language that you might bump into. And again, going back to that thing about engineering, I notice it all the time now. And I'm not saying I'm correct, but people coming from just heads down working in Logic all day and then turning up at a gig and expecting it to sound completely the same and doing the same things with their computers and their plugins that they would in a live environment. There's just trying to explain that things are going to be a lot different, and you should just bear that in mind when you're approaching a live environment. We've all seen the video clip of Madonna live on stage, and some massive feedback, and she's got a finger in her ears going, "Will someone explain to me what that noise is?" It's really, you should know by now, girl.
Where can people buy the book?
Well, actually, the tour book is not in print anymore, and I am writing the new version at the moment, but it's being delayed, obviously, because there's no live music business. So the new one is called The Live Music Business, and it's rewritten and updated what it will be, but there's no point at the moment because we don't know how the live music business is going to manifest itself. But there is some information about the live music business if you're interested on my website, livemusicbusiness.com, and people can always email me if they have questions about specific things to do with getting on stage.
What's the one piece of advice you would give to someone starting out in the music industry, either band or roadie?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. I suppose it's just learning all the time, being open to new ideas. I'm still learning all the time. There's technological change, but there's also, it's just how people perceive you and how you perceive them. So it's just, I'd say, just having a completely open mind and enjoying it as much as possible.
How do people get in contact with you?
Through my website, livemusicbusiness.com. There's a form on there, or you follow me on Twitter, livemusicbiz, B-I-Z.
I'd like to thank my guest Andy Reynolds for being on Rock Chat with Trace.